30 seconds. That is how long it takes for a modern army to begin dying. Not from bullets, not from bombs, but from an empty fuel gauge. And nobody is talking about it. I need you to stop what you're doing right now because what I'm about to walk you through is something that military analysts have been quietly discussing in classified briefings for months, while mainstream media keeps recycling the same tired headlines about frontline positions and airstrike numbers. The real story, the story that actually determines who wins and who loses in modern warfare, is happening somewhere you would never think to look. It's happening in warehouses, in port terminals, in the fuel pipelines buried under roads you've never heard of. And once you understand how these systems actually work, you will never be able to watch a war report the same way again. Because here's the thing that keeps experienced military planners awake at night. The most advanced fighting force on the planet, trained soldiers, precision weapons, satellite communications, the full technological weight of a superpower behind them, can be brought to an absolute halt without a single shot being fired at a single soldier. You just have to know where to cut. And increasingly, the people planning these campaigns know exactly where to cut. Stay with me, because I'm going to take you inside something most people never think about. I'm going to show you the hidden architecture of modern military power, the system underneath the system, and explain why the wars of the next decade will be decided not by the soldier in the fighting position, but by the logistics officer staring at a spreadsheet watching numbers count down to zero. Let's start with a fundamental reality that military doctrine has understood for over a century, but that public commentary almost never addresses seriously. A modern combined arms force is, at its core, a consumption machine. It consumes fuel at rates that are genuinely staggering to anyone who hasn't spent time looking at the raw numbers. A single main battle tank burns through roughly 400 liters of diesel in a day of active operations. Multiply that across an armored brigade, 60 to 70 tanks, plus hundreds of infantry fighting vehicles, artillery tractors, engineering equipment, support vehicles, and you are looking at fuel consumption figures that exceed what a medium-sized city uses in a week. Every single week, the operation continues and fuel is just the beginning. Ammunition consumption in sustained combat operations is something that even experienced observers consistently underestimate. A single artillery battery firing at standard rates can exhaust a week's worth of peacetime stockpile in 48 hours of serious combat. Precision-guided munitions, the weapons that dominate modern battlefield footage, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per round and are consumed at rates that have repeatedly shocked even the nations producing them. Ukraine taught the entire Western defense establishment a brutal lesson about this. Production capacity that seemed entirely adequate for peacetime deterrence was exposed as catastrophically insufficient the moment actual sustained combat began. Factories that hadn't been run at wartime rates in decades suddenly needed to produce in a month what they had previously produced in a year. Then you add food, medical supplies, spare parts for equipment that breaks down constantly because military hardware is pushed far beyond its designed operating parameters in real combat, communications equipment, engineer materials for fortification and obstacle construction, water in quantities that most people would find shocking because a soldier in the field in summer heat requires liters and liters per day just to maintain basic physical function. Add all of this together, and what you get is not an army. What you get is a river. A continuous flowing river of material that has to move constantly from the point of production, through port facilities, along road and rail networks, through intermediate staging bases into forward depots, and finally to the hands of the soldier who is actually going to use it. Stop that river, not slow it, stop it. And that magnificently equipped, brilliantly trained, precisely coordinated military force begins to die, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the absolute certainty of a clock running down. And here is what makes this so important to understand right now, in this moment, as the nature of modern conflict is shifting in ways that most Western publics have not yet absorbed. The people planning adversary operations against modern military forces have been studying this logistics architecture for decades. They have been mapping the choke points. They have been identifying the facilities whose destruction would produce cascading failure rather than isolated disruption. They have been developing the targeting databases, the weapon systems, and the operational concepts needed to attack not the army itself, but the invisible river that the army depends on for its existence as a fighting force. What this means in practical terms is that the central military competition in the early 21st century is not primarily about who has the best fighter jet or the most accurate missile or the most capable tank. Those things matter, but they matter within a larger contest that is about logistics infrastructure, its construction, its protection, and its destruction. The side that can sustain its own supply chain while disrupting the enemy's supply chain wins. The side that cannot maintain that material flow, no matter how capable its individual weapons and units are, loses, not eventually, loses definitively, because there is no coming back from logistics collapse within the time frame of an actual military campaign. Let me give you a concrete way to think about what operational logistics collapse actually looks like, because it's not something that appears dramatically on a battlefield map. It's cumulative, it's quiet. And by the time anyone outside the command structure understands how serious it is, the situation is often already irreversible. Day one of supply disruption, the professional military machine you're looking at appears entirely intact. Units are in their positions. Vehicles are operational. Ammunition stocks are present. Officers are issuing orders, and soldiers are executing them. The only difference is that the resupply convoys that should have arrived are not arriving, and the forward logistics officers are starting to do mental calculations about how long what they have will last. Day two, those calculations are getting more urgent. Fuel conservation protocols are beginning to be implemented, certain vehicle movements are being restricted, generators are being run less, non-essential operations are being curtailed, the Army still looks like an army. Day three, the ammunition situation is becoming genuinely concerning in the most active sectors. Unit commanders are being told to reduce their rate of fire. Artillery missions that would have been approved automatically a week ago are now being evaluated more carefully and sometimes denied. Aviation sorties are being rationed. Day four, soldiers in the most forward positions are beginning to notice that the food situation is different. The regular ration deliveries are not coming. They are eating from emergency reserves, the stocks that are supposed to be held back for genuine last resort scenarios, and they are being told to consume less than their bodies need to sustain physical performance under stress. And on day five, what you have is no longer, in any operationally meaningful sense, a fighting force. You have a large number of very well-armed, very well-trained, deeply professional human beings sitting in positions they cannot advance from, cannot reinforce, and cannot safely extract from, eating less than they should, rationing ammunition they know they cannot replace, watching fuel gauges that are not going back up. That is logistics collapse, and it is every bit as decisive as any battle ever fought. Now here's where this gets strategically significant in ways that extend beyond any single conflict. The weapon systems capable of executing precision strikes against hardened logistics infrastructure have proliferated far beyond the small club of major powers that possessed them even 15 years ago. Precision-guided munitions that once required the industrial capacity and technological base of a major superpower to produce are now being manufactured by regional powers, by non-state actors with state backing, and in some cases by organizations whose organizational sophistication would have been unimaginable to military planners even a decade ago. The barriers to conducting the kind of deep, systemic, infrastructure-targeting campaign that was once the exclusive domain of the United States military have come down dramatically, and they are continuing to come down. What this means for military planning globally is a question that every serious defense ministry in the world is currently wrestling with. Because the traditional answer to logistics vulnerability, redundancy, dispersal, hardening, defense in depth, was developed in an era when the number of actors capable of simultaneously striking multiple redundant systems was extremely small. The theory was sound. If you build enough alternate supply pathways, if you disperse your depots widely enough, if you maintain enough stockpiles that any individual strike only reduces your capacity without eliminating it, you can absorb interdiction attempts and continue to function. The problem is that this theory was designed for a world where a precision strike at the operational depth of your logistics network was extremely difficult to execute and even more difficult to execute simultaneously across multiple targets. When the operational environment changes, when the number of precision weapons that can be simultaneously directed against your logistics infrastructure increases by orders of magnitude, the redundancy math changes with it. Striking every redundant pathway at the same time is now, in some operational scenarios, achievable. And when it is achieved, the logic of redundancy inverts. Every alternate route you built becomes another target that had to be struck. Every backup depot becomes another coordinate in the targeting database. The more elaborate the redundancy architecture, the more comprehensive the strike package that eliminates it needs to be. But if that comprehensive package can be assembled, the result is a logistics system that collapses completely rather than degrades partially, because there is nothing left to root around the damage. This is the operational logic that should be occupying every serious discussion of modern conventional military power. Not the individual weapon systems, not the latest variant of a particular fighter or tank or missile, the architecture, the vulnerability of the invisible river, the question of what happens when the systems that everyone assumed would sustain a modern military force are no longer there to sustain it. And I'll tell you what the answer looks like from inside a military command structure, because it is far more human and far less abstract than the clinical language of operational analysis tends to suggest. What it looks like is officers who have spent their careers building expertise in combined arms combat operations suddenly confronting a problem that their training didn't prepare them for. Not how to fight, but how to tell soldiers under their command that there is nothing left to fight with. What it looks like is logisticians staring at inventory reports and doing arithmetic that tells them what their commanders don't want to hear. What it looks like is soldiers who trusted that the institutional weight of the military machine behind them would ensure they had what they needed to do the job they were asked to do, discovering that the machine has been interrupted at a level they cannot see and cannot fix. Military operations are built on assumptions. Assumptions about what will be available. Assumptions about what can be sustained. Assumptions about what the enemy can and cannot do to interfere with the material foundations that everything else rests on. When those assumptions are wrong, when the capability to disrupt the logistics foundation is greater than the planners accounted for, the operational consequences cascade in ways that no amount of tactical skill or individual unit quality can compensate for. You cannot shoot your way out of an empty fuel tank. You cannot maneuver around an empty ammunition pouch. You cannot sustain combat effectiveness with soldiers who have not eaten in 2 days. These are not tactical problems, they are physical facts. And the trajectory of military technology, the proliferation of precision strike capabilities, the development of increasingly sophisticated targeting intelligence, the operational creativity being demonstrated by actors who have spent decades studying the vulnerabilities of Western military logistics systems, that trajectory is running in one direction. The invisible river is becoming more visible to the people who need to attack it and less defensible by the people who need to protect it. That is the central military strategic reality of this moment, and it is reshaping conflicts in real time in ways that the headlines are not capturing. The next major conventional military confrontation, wherever it occurs, whoever the parties are, will be decided by logistics before it is decided by combat. The side that wins will not necessarily be the side with the better weapons or the better trained soldiers or the more capable air force. It will be the side that sustains its material flow while disrupting its enemy's material flow. And understanding that, really understanding it, in its full operational and human weight, is the only way to understand what is actually happening in the conflicts shaping the world right now. Stay with this channel, because there is much more to come.